All right, it was, what, 10 years ago this week that Lehman Brothers fell? 10 years after that financial crisis, look where we've come. Both presidents, that is Barack Obama back then and Donald Trump since, arguing that they're a big reason why we're back to where we are. So who can take a bow for what's going on? To Reagan economic advisor Art Laffer. We have Obama economic advisor Austan Goolsbee. Gentlemen, welcome to both of you.
Thank you. Hi, Austin.
Do you think
hey,
also...
Art, how you doing?
All right.
We got the pleasantries out of the way here. All right. They're such nice guys. All right. Austin, I'll begin with you on this notion that I always think that both presidents can take a bow. I mean, we came through the depth of something under President Obama when he came into office. He righted a lot of things. People will talk about the Federal Reserve and what it did and didn't do and all. But it happened under his watch. We'd certainly blame him if it had gone the other way under his watch. The same with Donald Trump. So is it fair to say that both presidents should take a bow for what's going on now?
I do think that's fair. I pretty much agree with what you said, and I would add the caveat, which I said when I was in the White House, and I continue to say when I'm out of the White House, 90% of what happens in the economy in terms of growth has nothing to do with Washington. It has to do with the private sector. But I think the economy's going well, and both of those presidents deserve some credit.
All right. So, Art, much can be said as well about a third player here, and that is the Federal Reserve, what it's doing now versus what it was doing then. Are you worried, because this is something a lot of Obama critics point out, that his was built on near zero interest rates for a long, long time, and they're similarly concerned that with rates moving up, this thing that the president brags about now could be torpedoed. What do you say?
I still think Reagan deserves all the credit for it now. But no, I'm just joking with you. No, I think Powell's doing a great job. I think interest rates should be raised. I think we should unwind all the quantitative easing. I think we should let markets be determined, interest rates determined in marketplaces. Because, you know, low interest rates, Neil, really discourage capital from flowing into the places they should flow into, the housing market, for example. The last 8 years, new housing starts per 10,000 population have been the lowest 8 years in our history. And that's because interest rates were too low and no one wanted to take the risk of lending to low credit borrowers for 30 years at 3%. So I think the move in interest rates is very good. And I do agree with Austin. I mean, you know, Obama came in at a very inappropriate time. I mean, the crash in the market, I mean, he was caught off guard. And he had some great advisors, including Austin, who I think was really spectacular in the advice he gave the president. But I think Trump is doing a lot better job now than Obama was doing at the very end. And I think the economy is showing signs of really responding to President Trump's policies. I think Trump has really done a great job in his first term so far.
You know, Austin, the question then going forward is what would keep this going? And a lot of people seem to think a steady rise in interest rates, which has been happening here. We've had, what, 6 rate hikes in this cycle, that if it continues at a slow and measured pace, it won't be too damaging. But, of course, that also means our debt will carry a higher price tag, and that itself could be a problem. What do you think?
Yeah, look, I think there's some element of that as the interest rates go up and as we cut taxes and blow up the deficit as the numbers are coming in and saying we're doing now. There are some concerns on that side. I think the bigger problem, maybe it's a political problem for the president, is that we've never had a president that was this unpopular when the economy was going as solidly as this. It's clear the American people do not give a great deal of credit to the president for what's happening. And I think part of that is self-induced. He's going out and saying, well, I'm going to put $200 billion, $500 billion of tariffs on China. I'm going to blow up NAFTA. I'm going to attack the Europeans. There are a lot of businesses and a lot of farmers and a lot of different industries in the U.S. where they're saying, whoa, wait a minute, let's not have our prices go up 25% right before Christmas. It doesn't make any sense. It could threaten the recovery, it could send us into recession.
Well, Art, obviously a number of business groups, I think 60 by last count, have been petitioning this president to go slow here, and they include U.S. auto manufacturers, apple growers, Maine lobstermen, vehicle parts makers, and the rest. So they're concerned to the point now that we have this Wall Street Journal story that seems to intimate the administration wants to reignite talks with the Chinese. So far, besides the Journal, we don't have anyone else confirming that. I just passed that along because well, we have the same owner, us and the Wall Street Journal, so we believe them. Now, but my only view on that is if they're concerned, they're echoing something that I'm sure is a concern for Republicans, right? That they're going to grab defeat from what should be the jaws of victory on a subject that traditionally helps the party in power, a good economy. What do you think?
Well, I think Austin's completely correct. Free trade is the right answer. Getting rid of non-tariff barriers, free trade, currency manipulation, all of that needs to be eliminated. The question is, how do you do it? And I think Trump is clearly a free trader in my mind. I think he's ran an international business.
Really?
He knows.
Because if this is free trade, I mean, he's not doing it at all.
I'm telling you from personal conversations with him as well as public, I think he wants to go to zero tariffs. He doesn't know how to get their attention.
It's a hell of a way to go about it, don't you think?
Well, would you tell me a better way? I mean, what do you do in Japan with their non-tariff barriers?
Not to do that, not to fight tariff for tariff. What does that prove?
Well, nobody, but if you bring him to the table, I think we're bringing Mexico to the table right now. I think Canada's going to come in. I think Juncker, when he came over here, is going to move towards more better, cleaner tariffs.
I mean, it might be just
China's coming now on
them
into
making a deal. Now, Austin,
but that's what he does.
All right,
that's what he does.
I understand.
And I don't understand that strategy either, Neil. I mean,
right.
I'm a chicken. When anyone confronts me with conflict, I hide under the bed, I cry, and I cuddle in the fetal position.
Yeah, but you don't
Trump
sell yourself
do
as a free trader when you do that, right?
But I
know what his goals are, and I'll always hear the never Trumpers say, there you go again. But my point here isn't to take sides. I just think that approach is going to backfire. It could be backfire in a big way.
I don't think it is going to backfire.
Right, well, I hope
really
you're
don't.
Right. You're far smarter than I.
I hope I'm right too, boy.
But Austin,
I really
let
do.
me ask
I
you
would
this.
hate to see
if this accelerates and the Chinese don't budge, and I think the last time you and I were chatting, you had freely spoken about how the Chinese can break things and fix things, and that Barack Obama was trying to deal with them, George Bush, Bill Clinton, George Bush Sr., on and on. To little avail. So if this approach were to work, and it is a controversial means to get the others to do your bidding and to change their policies, everything would be great. But I have doubts about that. And just me, I have doubts. Do you?
Yeah, I have a lot of doubts, as I expressed. You and I have talked about this many times, and that is, if we're going to publicly try to shove this in China's face, and we've already alienated our own allies, okay, the thing to do if you want to get to change Chinese behavior, the thing that has worked before on various things, is to get a whole bunch of allies together who go down and collectively confront China. And what we've done is try to declare trade wars against Japan, against Europe, against the North American countries, and then go to China and say, we want you to change your behavior. And what China is literally doing now is going to the WTO, and they're going to file a grievance against the United States, and there's a decent chance that they get our own allies to side with China against the United States. And if that happens, it's going to be breathtaking, and it might even lead the administration to say they want to pull the U.S. out of the WTO, in which case we're definitely going to go into recession.
Well, I don't see that either. But who knows? It's still early, and maybe it's all part of this threatening game of chicken going on here. But, gentlemen, I want to thank you both very, very much.